Hey all, here OS Reviews. You're watching our hands-on review of the Wunder360 C1. This is a 360-degree VR compatible camera that retails for $150, and it has many unique features. The first is that it's actually a dedicated unit as opposed to something like the Lifey Eye, which we also saw a few months ago. So that was a 360 camera that you needed to connect to a phone or tablet using micro USB or Lightning for iPhones, whereas this is a device that you don't need to be connected to your phone to use. Of course, you can still download a companion app if you want to monitor and view back content in real time captured using the camera. It also features up to 4K resolution for photos, which is Ultra HD, and you can record video up to 3K resolution, which is again still very impressive. And how it achieves this 360-degree effect is basically has two lenses, one on the front and one on the back, and it stitches the two images together to capture this very wide angle effect where you can pan around and see everything within one shot. It also has a unique social 360 live streaming feature. It has Wi-Fi built in, so you can stream content in 360 VR to YouTube, for instance, and it also has a 9-axis IMU stabilizer. This is kind of a form of electronic image stabilization, so not quite as good as optical image stabilization, but still very impressive, and we'll have to see how well it works later on in this video. On the back here, some very basic information. So for all of these kind of unique features on board, $150 really isn't bad. It seems to be a pretty promising 360 VR companion camera, considering that it has up to 4K resolution, live sharing capabilities. So hopefully the performance won't disappoint. In the box, we also have access to the cable, which is micro USB. This is just for charging. It takes about 2 hours to completely charge up, and afterwards you should be able to use it for about an hour to an hour and a half before you need to recharge it once again with a live streaming turned on. And this is also a lanyard cord that you get to prevent the camera from getting dropped if you are just walking around. And finally, in here we have the user manuals and pamphlets, which is actually pretty well documented, as you can see here. It's getting increasingly rare for electronics in 2018 to have very full manuals, but you get many languages as well as detailed instructions provided with this. Taking a closer look at the design of the C1, the body of the camera is made out of polycarbonate plastic, but it has a pretty hefty feel to it. You can see the 180-degree lenses both on the front as well as the back, protected by this curved glass. And below here we also have a OLED display, which is energy saving and tells you basic status, like if it's been connected, how long it's been recording. And there's also a simplified key that you can tap once to begin recording, tap again to stop recording. So very nice ergonomics. On the side, you can tap on this to turn on wireless Wi-Fi, and on the other side we have access to a dedicated power switch and a menu key that you can tap on to change between modes like recording video and capturing photos. Down here we have the lanyard strap. We have a standard tripod mount, and we also have access to a flap that covers up the micro USB and micro SD card slot for expanding the memory, and it supports up to 64GB cards without any issues. As a quick size comparison, here it is next to the HTC Re, which is another handheld camera, but the Re isn't a 360 cam. As you can see here, there's no lens on the back. It just has a single wide angle lens, making the Wunder360 a bit more versatile, and the overall weight as well as dimensions are pretty similar. And here's a action camera. This is the Xiaomi Mija 4K action cam, a more conventional form factor, but again, not a 360 camera. And this one is definitely more ergonomic as far as having this grip, almost like a small selfie stick. Right, so turning the camera on, there's a hello message that pops up. There's also an LED status light on the right that will blink for a few times, and it's going to remain still when it's connected to the phone using Wi-Fi. And by default, Wi-Fi is actually turned on. You can see by this little indicator. On the left, it's also going to tell you the resolution that it's shooting at. It's currently 2K at 60 frames per second. This is the battery status, and this is the time remaining on the memory card that we have inserted. Right now, it's just a 1 gig card, recording about 18 minutes or so of content. It gets a little bit warm after you use it for about 20 minutes, so that's something to quickly point out, but never gets really hot. All right, so the app itself is just called Wunder360. You can simply tap on this to open it up, and here's the interface. Let's click on one of these sample images, and this is captured at 4K resolution. You can tell there's actually sufficient detail. Our experience with Lifey Eye, among other 360 cameras, is that resolution often needs to be pretty high to capture a lot of detail. Maybe it's because of the lens that they're using, maybe it's because of the sensors, but oftentimes when you get into VR cameras, even if you go up to full 1080p or 2K, it can still seem a little bit grainy and not as clear as a traditional camera. But at 4K, you can tell how there's still plenty of detail and colors seem to be pretty accurate. On the very bottom, you always see this Wunder360 spherical action camera sign. It's actually a logo embedded onto all the shots, a watermark that I'm not sure if you can actually remove. We'll have to dig into the settings a little bit more to find out. And on the top, you can see that indeed it captures 360 degrees and slices the two shots together. You can see a little bit of a faint line in this image where it's sliced together, but overall it's not too bad. And again, you have a very wide angle effect. I can tap one also to take a look at this in the gyroscope mode, where I can rotate the phone using my accelerometer to take a look at the viewback experience. And this would also work pretty well if you put it into a VR helmet and tilt your way around to look at the entire shot. And here's one more where it's what's called Tiny Planet, and everything is squished together at this origin, and we have kind of this warped effect, which is kind of interesting. Tap on it once more to go back into the traditional mirror view, fisheye lens, and then Tiny Planet again. On the top here, I can also either delete this, I can capture a screenshot, or I can share it onto social media like you see below there. So a pretty interesting interface. I can tap on the green key here to immediately launch into the camera, and that will begin recording content. That will give us a live preview in a few seconds, as you can see here. So there's a slight delay like with most Wi-Fi cameras out there, but overall it's not too bad, and it actually works really well. Right now we are shooting in a relatively dimmer environment just because it's nighttime, but you can see that the shot still looks fairly well lit, so the overall image quality really is pretty decent for a 360 camera that is still relatively affordable. On the top, we see the resolution as well as the battery status remaining, and there's also a focusing mode. So if I put the camera down now onto this table, I can tap on this once to go into a manual mode, so you can see some of the color apertures changing. You can tweak the white balance, ISO settings, things like that. So this is all adjustable if you want to play around with it. And of course, I can also zoom in, zoom out in real time as I'm using this camera. And here's the watermark again in the shot. I can also slide back and forth between different types of footages, like time lapse, for instance. If you hear a beep, that means it's changed modes, and it's going to display that on the display on the front here as well. You can see in time-lapse mode, we have a 0.5-second indicator, and the recording time has also gone up because the resolution is a little bit lower. So overall, the interface is actually pretty slick. It reminds me a lot of what iOS and their camera app looks like. It's not necessarily a bad thing because it is easy to understand and to use. On the bottom here, I can also tap on this icon to take a look at additional settings. On the W icon actually is the playback mode, where it goes and takes a look at the video files as well as images you've captured onto the camera locally, and it will send that information to the phone using Wi-Fi. So it's a little bit slow if you're trying to view back longer video files. I would recommend connecting it using USB or transferring the content onto a computer for view back if you want the fastest experience there. But I can also save files onto the phone's memory if they show up in a list format over here. Going back to the accessories, I want to point out that they also give you an OTG micro USB to a 3.5mm auxiliary input. Basically, the Wunder360 supports additional third-party microphones. So if you don't like the mic that's built onto the very top of the unit, let's say if you are out shooting in really windy environments and you want a higher quality microphone, that's entirely possible to connect an external mic. A closer look at some of the sample images as well as videos. Again, I'm going to be using the phone to give you a sense of what the quality is like as opposed to the raw footage, just because the raw footage is in 360, and that would be difficult to upload those photos onto YouTube for it to get the full experience, as well as the video, since it needs to be embedded into a complete 360 video, and the rest of the review that you're watching is in regular mode. But regardless, you can tell that the image quality seems to be decent. Of course, it doesn't have as much detail as a competing maybe traditional 4K action cam or even a regular point-and-shoot digital camera. As you can see, a little bit more noise creeping into some of these shots. But that is completely in line and normal for 360 cameras, just because there's a lot more processing and algorithms going on for stitching the entire shot together. And if we kind of pan around the room over here, you can see that, again, it captures the light pretty well, a little bit overexposed in some areas, but again, this is a pretty challenging environment right now, just because certain parts of the room are more brightly lit than others. And here are a few other shots, again, captured by other users, but I wouldn't necessarily submerge it into water because it's not going to be fully waterproof, at least not without an additional case or accessories. And you can tell that, again, in broad daylight, the quality improves pretty dramatically. Still a little bit of graininess in terms of the texture as well as finer details and edges, but colors are captured pretty well. Again, there's still a faint line that you can make out in terms of the stitching of the two lenses, just because it is really hard to make this completely seamless, especially on such a small handheld 360 cam. But as a whole, it is more than usable, and you can see that it captures everything pretty well for a dedicated 360 camera that isn't doing any of the processing on the phone. And here's another shot that gets a little bit darker, but we still have some light creeping in around us, and you can see the colors here are captured pretty well. With a wide angle lens like this, you can definitely appreciate more within one frame of shot. And again, it is a 360 camera, so you can explore more, especially if you put it into a VR helmet and start tilting around, and it feels like you're actually transported to the place that you were capturing, which is awesome. Definitely some jump frame rates here and there, especially if you try and interact too much or too often with the video experience, you'll see again a bit more stuttering. So not completely buttery smooth, just because I believe this one is right now captured at nearly the highest resolution, which isn't at the 60 FPS, but still you can get an impressive amount of details, and colors are actually captured again pretty realistically even among difficult environments. It is one of the sharper, again, 360 cameras that I've seen in this price category. And additional features include a screen that I can tap on here, and that will split the entire video into single frames that doesn't allow you to directly crop, but you can actually skip forward into particular scenes a little bit more easily. It's actually a pretty interesting visualization, and it works quite well. It's very clever. I can also change the aspect ratio from 1:1 and all the way to 16:9, also to 9:16 or 2:1, and that stretches it in various orientations that you can save it as a new video file if you want to. I can also look back and use a software to stabilize the footage artificially after you've captured it already, which is pretty interesting. And I can also, of course, change it into different types of visualization modes again, even when the video is playing back, which is actually pretty cool. And finally, I can also tap on Edit, and that allows me to apply different filters. You can see all of these below, as well as beautify faces. So it's going to use a little bit of AI to recognize people. And it's also allowing us to edit things like trim it, in addition to change the sound if I want to add a song instead of the regular footage that's picked up using the microphone. So there's a lot of things that you can correct and manually tweak depending on how you want to adjust the video file, and then save it if you're satisfied. Afterwards, of course, you can share it onto YouTube if you want to, or onto many other platforms that supports 360, such as Facebook Live. Although the 9-axis gyroscope isn't going to provide as smooth of a playback experience as an optical stabilization camera, it still works very well and mitigates some of the shakiness that you get from naturally walking around, and so the overall footage is quite impressive. The software suite is also very well designed, the camera itself is easy to grip and hold, and of course the fact that you get up to 3K and potentially up to 60 frames per second is also very impressive at this particular price. And the quality also looks quite good if you bring it back directly from the memory card or on your computer. Now, slight downsides will include the fact that certain software as well as websites like YouTube tends to compress 360 VR footage. So if I uploaded the same footage onto YouTube, for instance, it would seem slightly more grainy. And although it does get again slightly warm, it still remains pretty comfortable to hold as well as to use for vlogging, as well as capturing unique shots and points of view as you are walking and traveling across new places. So thanks for watching this video here at OS Reviews. Overall, if you're considering a budget as well as maybe your first 360 VR camera, this is certainly one to consider, just because it works well both as a dedicated unit and as one that you can connect to the smartphone to get a more complete software experience. Thanks again for watching. You can check out more details in the links down below, but this has been our hands-on review of the Wunder360 C1 VR 360 camera.